Okay, so welcome to today's seminar. My name is Pippa Chapman, and I'm the chair for today's seminar. I'm a soil scientist, and I'm a professor of biogeochemistry in the School of Geography at the University of Leeds. And my research interests really align a lot with what we're going to hear today from Ruth's presentation. I'm interested in the impact of agriculture on soil health, soil functions, ecosystem services, and I suppose agriculture as a whole. And I'm based here at the School of Geography at the University of Leeds, and it's great pleasure that I welcome you to this seminar as part of the Global Food and Environment Institute, where we're going to hear from Dr. Ruth Wade, who's a research fellow in regenerative farming at School of Geography and Biology at the University of Leeds. And her talk is about the research programme she's currently part of, FixOurFood. And in particular, she's going to be talking about regenerative farming in Yorkshire. Ruth joined the university about 18 months ago as a research fellow on this large research programme, which is FixOurFood, and she'll tell you a little bit more about that in her talk today. She has a degree in biology from Sheffield and a PhD in agroecology from York. She's an ecologist at heart, and she uses her knowledges and ideas from ecological systems in agricultural systems, working towards more sustainable farming practices whilst maintaining a resilient and productive farming system. And she's really interested in plant-soil interactions, and particularly in plant defence strategies and multi-trophic interactions. And before joining Leeds, she worked as a consultant at ADAS, where she delivered research for the agricultural sector, as well as working with farmer groups in the UK, USA and Canada, and really trying to narrow the gap between actual and potential yields. And her role here in Leeds in the FixOurFood project has really been to quantify the impacts of regenerative farming practices on soil health, greenhouse gas emissions, water quality, yield and profit. And to do this, she set up some field trials in collaboration with NIAB at the University of Leeds farm. And I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more about this in her talk today. I just want to let those of you new to this seminar series that it's part of the Global Food and Environment Institute seminar series, which takes place regular. If you look at the website and follow us on Twitter, you can get more information about other upcoming talks. And the Institute is an interdisciplinary research community which brings together members from across academia, industry and public policy to work on the integrated challenges of food security and climate change. And so before I introduce Ruth to you, I'd just like to remind you of the seminar etiquette. So please do ensure that your cameras and microphones are switched off for the duration of the presentation. It will be about 20-25 minutes long. And during that time, please do use the chat function for any questions you might have. And at the end of Ruth's presentation, I will ask her some of the questions that have come up that are popular and collate some of the questions that she can answer some of your questions. So I remind you that the seminar is being recorded, and the recording will be made available to you all via YouTube after today. So now I'm just going to pass over to Ruth for her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pippa. And thank you so much for inviting me to speak to you today, and thank you for joining to hear about the work that we're doing on regenerative farming in Yorkshire. So as Pippa said, my name is Ruth Wade, and I'm in the School of Biology at the University of Leeds, but I also work very closely with the School of Geography and the Faculty of Environment, with Lisa Collins, Stephen Banwart, Pippa Chapman and Giza Rice. And as Pippa says, I'm working on a large collaborative project called FixOurFood, which is funded by the UK Food Systems Strategic Priorities Fund and is led by the University of York with lots of other university collaborators and organisers, of which the University of Leeds is one of them. And I'll be telling you more about the work that we're doing on regenerative farming in Yorkshire. So really briefly, just to give you a background of the FixOurFood programme, its aim is to understand how to steward system transformation towards a regenerative food system. Now, this is a huge challenge, so the project itself focuses on Yorkshire as an example region, using the learnings from this to build the rest of the UK and beyond. There are many different work packages on this project. So the first one is trying to understand the current food system. The second is different innovations through healthy eating for young children, hybrid food economies, to regenerative farming systems. And there are other work packages looking at metrics, policy and governance, narratives, system integration and learning. Now, that's a huge, very brief overview of a very large collaborative project. So please visit the FixOurFood website for more information and also our up-to-date activities. The University of Leeds is running the regenerative farming part of this project. And that's what I'm going to focus on today. So first of all, what is regenerative agriculture? The big burning question. And actually, at the moment, there is no clear single goal or definition of regenerative agriculture. And when you read the literature or look at different websites, there's a real range in the goals of regenerative agriculture, from improving the health of the soil, restoring highly degraded soil, all the way to the answer to climate change, reversing it, through to a more philosophical approach to farming. And there's no consensus whether it should be practice-based or outcome-based, how we should go about measuring it, and whether it should be and can we certify it. But whilst we continue to have this conversation about the definition and understanding how to measure it, many farmers are actually already getting on with lots of regenerative agricultural practices. And they are focusing mainly on 6 principles of regenerative agriculture, which have been popularised mainly by Gabe Brown in his book that I have here, Dirt to Soil. And I thoroughly recommend anyone reading this book, even if you're not from a farming background, because it's really about his family's journey to regenerative farming system. And the 6 principles that they talk about are understanding the context of the farm. So what your soil type is, what your land is, what climate you're in, and what kind of farm business you have. And then from there on, it's minimising soil disturbance, maximising crop diversity, keeping the soil covered, maintaining a living root, and integrating livestock. And many of the farmers that we've spoken to really use these principles behind any decision that they are making on their farm. But to gain a deeper understanding of the current attitudes and activities around regenerative agriculture, we distributed a survey where we received 142 responses from farmers, most of which were from England. Half said that they were already practicing regenerative agriculture, and most had positive feelings towards regenerative agriculture already. And so one of the questions we asked was, what is the main aim of regenerative agriculture? And over the next few slides, I'm going to show you a few graphs just like this with the different selection options that we gave for these different questions. Down in rank order from the most selected to the least selected. And on the x-axis, we have the percent of respondents, and the numbers at the end of the bars are the total number of respondents that selected that specific option. Now, for this question, we actually only allowed respondents to select one of the following options. And this was really because we wanted to know what was the main aim of the regenerative agriculture from the farmers who responded. Now, first of all, the thing to note is there was no overall consensus, so there was not one option that was selected by the majority of respondents. But the one that was most selected was improving soil quality and fertility and restoring degraded soils. And down at the other end of the scale, only one person selected improving water quality, and only 2 people selected reducing the use of agrochemicals and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And I think this is really important to have this background information to understand what farmers feel the main aim of regenerative agriculture is, especially when we're having those conversations about transitioning. So another question we asked were, which practices are already being used? Now, for this question, we allowed respondents to select as many of the options as they wanted. And it was really exciting to see that over 50% of respondents were already using cover crops, direct drilling, increasing crop diversity in arable, reducing tillage, retaining crop residue, and increasing crop diversity in grassland. And so this is so exciting that there's so many people starting these practices, but there's very little actual practice information and evidence behind these practices, although farmers many are seeing the impacts of these practices on their own land already. And down at the other end, 19 respondents selected that they were already using agroforestry, and I guess this suggests that there's less practice-based information about agroforestry and also longer returns, making it least user-friendly, I suppose. So another question was what motivations were to moving towards regenerative agriculture. And again, respondents were allowed to select as many of the options as they wanted. And there was an overwhelming majority of improving soil health, future-proofing the farm business, and increasing resilience to flooding and drought. And down at the other end, 24 of respondents only selected gain access to government subsidies, which I think is quite reflective of the access to government subsidies, how much they're offering, and whether farmers want to rely on them or not. And certainly when you visit farms, and thank you so much to all those farmers who have had myself and Pippa visit to learn about what people are already doing and the motivations and challenges behind regenerative agriculture. But you can really see the impact of these practices. So these were two fields either side of a hedge, so in completely exactly the same place. One field was direct drilled and one field was ploughed. And you can really see the water sitting on the soil in the ploughed field, and clearly it's drained through in the direct drilled field. And when we dug up this soil, you can see in the ploughed field, the soil has lost its soil structure, and the impact from water droplets, because there's no soil armour, has led to what we call capping of the soil, which stops water infiltration into the soil. And this is a problem for crop growth, water availability later on in the year, but also soil erosion as well. But despite all of these incredible motivations and visual impacts of these different practices, there are many challenges to regenerative agriculture as well. And although there wasn't an overwhelming majority selected option for this question, lots of respondents had challenges about lack of information, lack of evidence, lack of financial support. Interestingly, only 6 respondents selected lack of regulation, and I guess this again is a reflection that many farmers already have many regulations to conform to, and there is a concern that this will also be an additional one. And again, when you visit farms, there's many different examples of challenges, and some examples here. Poor seeding, germination and establishment, because you've left all of this soil armour behind, crop residue. And when you go into direct drill, there might be a poor seed soil contact, which is low germination, and also a lovely breeding ground for slugs. And this is a huge risk for farmers, and this causes profit loss, and also, a lot of financial loss because you've invested in different practices as well. And then other examples are, for example, unstoring out competing the cash crop. And this is due to weather and also timing and experience of doing these kind of trials. And there's no, like I said, practice information really on the timing of these interventions. And here grass understory was out competing the maize cash crop. So one thing I'm really proud about from this research project, and one thing that I was really determined to do, was to ask local farmers, what can the university do to support regenerative farming or any farming practices that are improving soil health for ecosystem services? And both through the survey as well as in consultation with workshops with farmers, I clustered the kind of responses that we got, and the Riding ones was to support through research, evidence-based practice, and that being particularly independent. Supporting knowledge transfer, particularly farmer-farmer knowledge exchange, and really spreading a positive message about what the incredible things that farmers are already doing, because there is a lot of negativity in the media and government at the moment. And we're not focusing on some of the incredible things that farmers are doing with small profit margins. And, you know, listening to that information, we decided that the project was going to be focusing on 4 key areas. So continuing to understand the current system, and that's really important because things are always changing. And this will be an ongoing activity of ours throughout the project. Supporting regenerative farming where we can, providing evidence-based practice, and making sure that that information is shared in many different ways so it's accessible to all. So I've talked a bit about how we've been trying to understand the current system. So for the next few slides, I'm going to tell you a bit about evidence-based practice, supporting regenerative farming, and sharing the information. So we have a number of different trials trying to support through evidence-based practice. I only have 20 minutes today, so I'm going to focus on a big plot trial that we have at the University of Leeds farm. But just to say that we also have other trials at the university's farm, as well as supporting a group of farmers in the North York Moors with farming and protected landscape funding, looking at different herbal ley mixes. But today I'm just focusing on this plot trial, as you can see in the image. And like I said, this is positioned at the University of Leeds' farm. We have a roughly 317 hectare commercial farm that is going through a standard rotation, really, with oilseed rape, potatoes, wheat, barley and beans. We have agroforestry plots, we have permanent leys, and NIAB Northern Centre sits on the university's farm. We also have the National Pig Unit with both indoor and outdoor pig herd. And we have Ask and Brian have their sheep grazing on the fields, and students that come to learn more about sheep husbandry. So this is a perfect place to really instrument a trial testing combinations of different practices of regenerative agriculture. And I developed a way in which we could test these combinations, and then through consultation with farmers and agronomists, deciding on the different practices and interventions that we put in place. So the aim of this trial is to demonstrate and measure the impacts of different transition strategies to regenerative agriculture, because this field has been conventionally managed for many years. And the objectives are to measure the impacts of different combination practices on soil health, greenhouse gas emissions, crop production, and gross margins, but also to use it as a demonstration for different transitions, so that as people who are interested can come and have a look and to discuss the different interventions and the challenges and successes that we've had. And finally, also to determine which combinations of practices are successful and bring about the greatest change at the University of Leeds farm, so then we can implement those at a wider scale. This trial is in collaboration with NIAB, and it is a plot trial, but it's 12 metres by 40 metres plots, so hopefully using as much commercial equipment as we possibly can. I was very excited to see that on Google Maps you can actually see the plots that we've ploughed in August. And there's 7 treatments, which I'll explain and outline in a second, in 3 different blocks in the field, and they are replicated. Each treatment, therefore, is replicated 3 times in different blocks across the field, and they're randomly allocated. So the treatments. So first of all, we have to have a control of the conventional farming system. So the soil has been ploughed, it has a single variety of wheat, and it's receiving 220 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare, all from a bagged fertilizer. And then the first transition to a more regenerative system is to minimise cultivation and the inclusion of farmyard manure. And our farmyard manure has come from the National Pig Unit. So these plots have had minimal cultivation. They still have a single variety of winter wheat, and obviously some of the nitrogen has come from the farmyard manure. And then from then on, each additional treatment is building on the previous one. So treatment 3 has minimal cultivation, the addition of farmyard manure, and a mixed blend of winter weeds. And then treatment 4 has minimal cultivation, the addition of farmyard manure, it has a mixed blend of winter wheats, and we grazed the wheat with sheep last month. And then treatment 5 has minimal cultivation, the addition of farmyard manure, mixed blend of winter wheat. We grazed this wheat last month with sheep, and it also has an addition of a companion crop as an understory underneath the wheat. And then we have 2 further treatments that actually change the rotation. So we have a short-term herbal ley, which will go back into the arable rotation. And this is really to see how much a herbal ley has an impact on the soil and whether you can see that in the yield and profits of the following year. And then also a longer term ley, which essentially is another control of how much a ley will impact the soil over the time of taking it out of arable cropping. So for those of you who are interested more in the agronomy side, just to quickly give you some overviews, the soil is a sandy silt loam. It was an oilseed rape. We spread farmyard manure at the end of August. We ploughed and harrowed the conventional plots and leys, and we broadcasted the herbal leys and companion crop at the end of August. The single variety of winter wheat that we're using is KWS Exitase. The blend is KWS Exitase, Theodore, Saki and Graham. And the herbal ley that we're using is Cotswolds GS4 mix. And we have a companion crop of mix of legumes and herbs. We grazed the wheat with sheep on the 1st of March, and the plots are receiving 220 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare in 3 splits. I had a little video of the sheep grazing there as well. So we're taking a plethora of measurements throughout the season. The most important, obviously, was to do a baseline of the entire plot trial before we did anything. So we measured soil physical, chemical and biological properties in every plot down to 50 centimetres. And we're doing an earthworm survey at the end of this month. We also have soil moisture and water potential probes in all of the plots. And we also have companies who are developing new sensors. For example, this one called a company called Poltech, looking at a sensor that will provide information for farmers on nutrient availability. We also have greenhouse gas measurement chambers, and this video is just showing one automatically opening here. And this is a fantastic opportunity that we have at the University of Leeds. Normally, to take greenhouse gas measurements, someone would have to go out with a chamber, take a syringe of gas and bring that back to the lab to analyse for greenhouse gas emissions. And this would give a point measurement of greenhouse gas emissions at that particular time. But as we know, greenhouse gas emissions change throughout the day and night. They change and respond to inputs from farmers. They change throughout season, whether the temperature and water availability, and over different years as well. So taking a point measurement obviously hinders our understanding of greenhouse gas emission over entire seasons and rotations. And so what's fantastic about these chambers is they're automated, they're opening and closing throughout the day, throughout the season, throughout the years, and we'll be getting information in real time of greenhouse gas emissions. And then just to say as well that each plot we've split in half. So one area we're not taking any destructive measurements from, so we can get a clear understanding of yield. And the other area we are doing destructive soil and crop sampling, so we can measure crop growth, disease, inputs, yield, and also profit and time as well, of how much the time these different practices are taking up. So you are very lucky, because this is the first time I've shown any of the greenhouse gas measurement data from the trial, and this is at very preliminary data. All of the chambers here, the data is put together, but I just wanted to show you the type of data we're collecting. So the top one is nitrous oxide emissions. And so a positive number is where nitrous oxide is being released, and a negative number is where it's taken up. And you can really see the two nitrogen splits that we put down on the ground. There's a peak in nitrous oxide emissions. And the bottom graph is net ecosystem exchange, so essentially the release and uptake of CO2. So during the day, there's negative values because photosynthesis is happening, and during the night, there's respiration, so CO2 is being released. And you can really see those diurnal patterns, and that's why automated chambers are so important, so we get a proper net ecosystem exchange balance throughout the year. So it's for me now to be really analysing this data, looking at the different treatments. So here's how the plots looked in December last year. So the conventional obviously has been ploughed, so you can see the soil looking very clean, which is what, you know, we would normally see, I suppose, in agriculture. But this change in mindset, looking at minimal cultivation, leaving that crop residue, that soil armour, and then the herbal ley having a greater cover and different species mix. And the plots only a few weeks ago, so the crop is really coming on. They've got a conventional image on the left. Middle one was actually grazed by sheep, and you can't really tell at all. And the herbal ley is really establishing and growing, and we'll be grazing that with sheep in the coming week. So I just wanted in the last few minutes to tell you a bit more about supporting regenerative agriculture. Obviously, this project hasn't been running for very long yet, but we really try and join as many events and support as many farmer-led knowledge transfer events as possible. So we've met with the future farmers of Yorkshire. We were part of a soil health workshop with the Dearne Valley Cluster Group. Part of the AHDB Monitor a Farm events, and we, as much as we can, support Yorkshire Agricultural Society events as well, and they do incredible events. If you're not on their mailing list already, I suggest you join on. And then we'll obviously be having open days at the University of Leeds farm to come and look at the different trials, as that, you know, is one of the objectives of them. For farmers to come and have a look at what we're doing, talk about the challenges and opportunities, maybe things that they could trial on their own farms, but also for anyone else who's interested to come and look at what we're doing. And finally, sharing information. So this is something that obviously we'll continue to do throughout the project. And here's Pippa talking at Groundswell last year, and we will be at Groundswell again this year. We also have stands at the Great Yorkshire Show. We speak at many different events and conferences. I have a newsletter that we distribute. We write blogs, written articles for lots of different magazines, such as Naiad Landmark and the Direct Driller. And I'm actually speaking at a conference next week, if you're there, the AAB conference on regenerative agriculture. And through all of these talks, we always try and really, you know, hone down that spreading of the positive message of the incredible things that the farmers are already doing. So that just leaves me to acknowledge a great number of people and collaborators, because none of these projects could be possible without you know, a really big team. So technicians, students, those from NIAB, as well as farmers who've really helped me with decision making on the trial. So thank you to all of you, as well as the funding from the Transforming UK Food Systems. And please do follow me on Twitter. I recently have been extremely busy, but I do tend to put on Twitter updates and also ask questions to people on Twitter on the best things to do on the trial. So please feel free to follow me. And with that, I will hand back over to Pippa to share the questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ruth, for outlining your trials at the University of Leeds Farm. I hope those listening found them interesting. As Ruth said, they only started last year, so there's obviously a lot more information to come over the coming years, particularly obviously as we move into the growth period and harvesting this summer, and then the subsequent rotation, use of cover crops, so there'll be a lot more information and data to come, but it's really good to hear about how you've set them up and everything. So please, if you've got any questions here, please do enter them into the chat. There's a few here, Ruth, so I will just ask you some of the ones that have come in, but yes. While we're answering them, please do add any more if you've got them. So there's a question here about the treatments you've got, and it says in treatments 2, 3, 4 and 5 they all include farmyard manure, but some farmers might be interested in regen ag on arable farms without livestock sources. So how do those farmers go about including farmyard manure, or is there a plan to include a treatment, or do you think this can't work as a regen ag transition? It's quite an interesting question there.
Yeah, that is an interesting question. So in that trial specifically, we don't have a treatment without farmyard manure, but I have great ambitions to extend this this trial. So, we've managed to set it up. It's working really well. We're getting lots of data. So it's now on us to expand this not only to other treatments, but to other areas on different soils and in different climates as well. So we're always open to suggestions of what farmers are really interested in as well, because like I said, we want this data to matter to people and be helpful for the different practices that they're using. So if that's something that people are interested in, looking at how the practices impact without that farmyard manure, that's definitely something that I will take a note of and see if we can install in future trials. But at the moment in this particular one, that is the problem with some of these trials as well, is that there's so many different options of different practices that we could include. It was difficult to hone down which ones we were going to trial, as regenerative agriculture covers so much. But we really thought about trying to include as many principles as we could. So that was the background to our decision making.
So another question, which again on greenhouse gas emissions. So I should say that but we're measuring carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. So all three of the major greenhouse gas emissions. But here. We've got a question about, will the comparison of plots from greenhouse gas perspective include the enteric emissions from the sheep grazing it?
Oh, good question. No, so they're just measuring from soil emissions. So any of their feces and we will be incorporated because we took the chambers out, so the sheep have grazed that area just like they've grazed the rest of it. So we will capture that part of the emissions, but the emissions actually from the sheep we won't be able to capture. We are looking at collaborating with the Farm Carbon Toolkit to calculate carbon emissions from the different practices. So that will be an interesting addition to the project. But yeah, not directly from the animals themselves.
Yeah, it's a good question, but obviously we can estimate emissions for the time they're on and add them to the emissions or the fluxes we're looking at between the air and the soil. But something to bear in mind. Some positive comments, Ruth, about engaging with farmers and promoting it, which I think is really great to hear.
Yeah, and just going back to that previous question as well about the farmyard manure addition, the other trial that I didn't have a chance to talk about on the farm that we have is a clover understory trial. So we've done a split field and we're trying to keep that clover there for the next 3 rotations. So that would be, something that would be adding nitrogen in a different context. So yeah, we do have other trials looking at different options as well.
So this is a good question as well. Really looking at that, I suppose, how we can support farmers to adopt more regenerative agriculture. What's needed to this type of farming become the mainstream? Is it government support or changes in the food system, or I'm sure there's many, but that's a question for you, Ruth.
Yeah, that is a good question, and I think there's probably many things. I think we need to have that conversation with farmers. I think there's lots of people who are very interested, certainly lots of people who are coming and attending Yorkshire Agricultural Society events. But when you speak to people who are attending, I think there's many people unsure, particularly of the risks of moving to regenerative agriculture. So from the I can only speak from the conversations that we've had, but particularly having more practice-based evidence and more information and guides and demonstrations that people can come and have a look at to understand what might work on their farm. So maybe managing those risks. And also giving more information about the timings of things and what will be having those big impacts. But there's new skills involved in moving to different regenerative practices. Linking arable farms to livestock farms is another activity that could be done. Yes, there's government support, so definitely needed in infrastructure and supporting farmers doing ecosystem services, because there's big concerns that will be a reduction in yield from some of these practices, and optimizing the system as well, so we don't see those drops in yield. Like, what can we do as researchers to maintain yields in these kind of systems? So yes, and obviously supermarkets, public opinions all matter as well. I think it's a joining of all the different sectors, isn't it? And I think that's one thing I like about the FixOurFood programme, because we really are challenging all the different parts of the food system to try and come together to support these innovations.
A quick question here about recording meteorological data at the site. Are we recording that? And obviously, how does the impact of climate, I suppose, come into trials?
Absolutely. And I didn't mention, but actually we're so lucky at the University of Leeds farm and in that particular field as well, because we actually have a Met Office station right in the corner of it. So we're getting incredible level of detailed information on meteorological data from that. We also have a Cosmos station, which is measuring soil moisture from the area in exactly the same place in the corner of our field. So we're very lucky in that sense to have all of that data available to us as well.
And again, another, I think this will be the last question that we've got time for, but again, one that's often raised, and I suppose that's about, does regenerative agriculture produce more nutritious food? Can this be measured? Aspects of that.
This is a really fascinating question that I'm really excited to try and get more research. And I know there's a company who's collaborated with the University of Leeds recently looking at the nutritional content of some of the foods produced by regenerative agriculture. I think there's lots of conversations to be had here. It depends what kind of food that you're producing, what kind of processing it goes through after you've created that food product. Is it a vegetable that you're eating straight away, or is it wheat that's going through a milling process? And really getting nutritionalists on board and measuring the impact of the practices on the food products is definitely something that we really should be doing more about, and something that I'm trying to get collaborators together to start to look at further.
Thanks very much, Ruth, for answering those questions. I hope you've all learnt a few things about the project, the FixOurFood project, the trials, and as highlighted in the chat, if you want to know any more information about the University of Leeds Research Farm, you can find it on the website, and it's same about the GFEI Institute. So really, it's just I just want to thank you all for joining this seminar. And also, if you want to know more about the FixOurFood project and Ruth's trials, then please do follow her on Twitter or email her with any questions you might have. As we said at the beginning, this presentation has been recorded and will be available for you to view again or share with others that might be interested on YouTube. And also, as Ruth said, we will be having open days at the farm if you want to come and find out a little bit more in detail about what we've been doing and what we're finding and our next steps after the harvest this summer. So thanks again, everyone, for joining. It's been great. Thank you.
Thanks, Pippa.